Fridays in October in New York were always a battlefield. The honking of cars stuck on Fifth Avenue mixed with the clicking of high heels on the sidewalk and the rushed curses of office workers. Sierra Lane, 27, darted through the crowd, her hastily tied brown hair a mess, clutching her iPad like a lifeline. She was late again for an important interview, and the editor-in-chief of City Pulse, Nora No-Nonsense Baxter, had threatened to fire her if she didn't finish the Power Players Behind the City article by tonight's deadline. Just one more source, Sierra muttered, slipping past a delivery guy who nearly collided with her. She needed a big name, someone who would make her piece stand out among the dozens of bland articles about rising stars and politicians. But the last name on her list, a real estate developer named Gerald Klein, had canceled on her at the last minute with the excuse of a meeting. Sierra didn't buy it. More likely, he was afraid she'd dig too deep into his shady projects. She stopped in front of a sleek glass tower on Wall Street, the sign Cross Corp gleaming in the afternoon sun. According to a reliable source, Gerald Klein was meeting here today. If I can't interview him, maybe I can squeeze a few quotes out of someone important, Sierra told herself, smoothing out her wrinkled navy blazer. She had no invitation, no appointment, but when had a journalist ever let that stop them? Inside the lobby, the chill of air conditioning and the scent of expensive perfume hung thick in the air. The receptionist, a woman with a stiff smile, looked at Sierra like a stray cat had wandered into a banquet. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, fingers flying over the keyboard. Sierra gave her most confident smile. "Sierra Lane, City Pulse. I'm here to see Gerald Klein. He's expecting me." A bold-faced lie, but improvising was part of the job. The receptionist frowned, checking the screen. "There's no appointment with Mr. Klein today. You'll have to—" "Just tell me what floor he's on," Sierra cut in, leaning across the counter, lowering her voice like she was sharing a secret. "I promise I won't be long." The receptionist sighed, clearly not in the mood to argue. 42nd floor, main conference room, but you'll need a pass for the elevator." Sierra winked, flashing an old press badge from a different event. "Already got one." She rushed toward the elevators before the woman could look closer. The 42nd floor felt like another world. Polished marble floors, frosted glass doors, and a silence so heavy Sierra could hear her heartbeat. She walked down the hallway, peeking through doors, searching for any sign of Gerald Klein. At the end of the corridor, a set of double doors was slightly ajar, warm light spilling out. She heard a deep, commanding voice inside. "This is it," she whispered and pushed the door open without knocking. The conference room was massive, with a long ebony table and luxurious leather chairs. But there was no Gerald Klein. Only one man stood at the head of the table, tall, sharply dressed in a tailored navy suit, black hair neatly combed, and piercing icy blue eyes fixed on her, as if she'd just thrown a grenade into the room. Behind him, a massive screen showed financial charts, and several high-level staff, all now silent, turned to look at her. "Who are you?" the man asked, his voice low but razor-sharp. "And how did you get in here?" Sierra swallowed hard, feeling like she'd just walked into a lion's den, but she wasn't the kind to back down. "Sierra Lane, City Pulse," she said, standing tall. "I'm here to see Gerald Klein. Where is he?" The man narrowed his eyes, scanning her from head to toe. Not with admiration, but as if analyzing a threat. "Gerald Klein isn't here," he said coldly. "And you just walked into a confidential Cross Corp meeting. Who let you in?" Sierra shrugged, keeping her tone calm. "The door wasn't locked. I took that as an invitation." A few staff members chuckled, but the man didn't. He stepped forward, every move radiating authority. "You're a reporter," he said, like the word itself was an insult. "Let me guess. You're digging for a scandal to land a front-page story?" Sierra crossed her arms, standing her ground. "Let me guess. You're the type of CEO who wears expensive suits and thinks he owns the world?" The room fell silent again, frozen. One staffer coughed nervously. But the man, whom Sierra now recognized as Damian Cross, CEO of Cross Corp, thanks to the nameplate on the table, just stared at her, a flicker of something in his eyes. Anger, but also curiosity. You have 10 seconds to leave, he said, his voice low and chilling, or I'll call security. Sierra smiled even as her heart pounded. 10 seconds? Generous. But I'm not going anywhere. I need a story, and you seem worth writing about. Damien tilted his head as if she'd told a joke that wasn't funny. You want a story? Here's your story. CrossCorp doesn't do business with spies posing as journalists. Get out, or I'll make sure you never set foot in this building again. Spy? Sierra scoffed, her voice sharp. I'm a journalist, not James Bond. And if you think that big boss voice of yours can scare me, you're mistaken. They stood there only a few feet apart, eyes locked like duelists. Neither flinched. Finally, Damien raised his hand and signaled for the staff to leave. Meeting adjourned, he said, without breaking eye contact. Once the room cleared, he stepped closer, his voice dropping. You want to play this game? Fine. But remember this. I don't lose. Sierra felt a jolt rush through her. Not fear, but something strange, like she'd just triggered something far bigger than she expected. Good, she shot back with a defiant smile, because neither do I. She turned to leave, but not before glancing back one last time. Damien Cross was still standing there, watching her, not with anger, but with something deeper, as if she had just walked into his life, and neither of them knew how much it was about to change. Sierra Lane stormed out of the CrossCorp tower, her sneakers slamming against the Wall Street pavement, as if she could stomp out the fury boiling inside her. The October wind whipped through her hastily tied brown hair, but she didn't care. In her mind, the image of Damien Cross, navy suit, ice blue eyes, and that deep commanding voice kept haunting her. Spy in a reporter's disguise, she muttered, mimicking his voice before scoffing. Dictator in a suit, more like it. She jumped onto the subway heading toward City Pulse's Midtown office, clutching her iPad filled with notes from the failed interview. Gerald Klein hadn't been there, and instead of a story, she'd walked straight into a clash with the most notorious CEO in New York. A man rumored to silence entire boardrooms with just one look. But Sierra wasn't afraid of him. Damien Cross might make the world tremble, but she was a journalist, and journalists didn't back down. The newsroom was its usual chaos. Phones ringing, keys clacking furiously, and the burnt smell of coffee wafting from the corner machine. Sierra collapsed into her chair, opened her laptop, and started typing like a storm unleashed. Damien Cross, the tyrant behind the glass fortress, she typed, her fingers pounding the keyboard. She wrote about CrossCorp as an impenetrable fortress, about Damien's cold stare, as if he owned the souls of everyone in that boardroom. She didn't have enough material to turn the piece into a major hit, but at the very least she could get under his skin. She was halfway through describing the CEO's condescending smirk when a voice as sharp as a blade cut through the air behind her. Lane, my office, now. Sierra sighed, shut her laptop, and dragged herself into Nora Baxter's glass-walled office. The editor-in-chief, 50, with cropped silver hair and steel-piercing eyes, sat behind her desk holding a folded newspaper. Sit, Nora commanded, pointing to the chair. Sierra obeyed, feeling like a kid summoned to the principal's office. I heard you barged into CrossCorp today, Nora began, her voice calm but lethal, and had a shouting match with Damien Cross, in the middle of a closed meeting. Sierra shrugged, trying to stay cool. I didn't barge in. The door was open, and he called me a spy, so I fired back. A little. A little? Nora raised an eyebrow. You called him a suit-wearing tyrant in front of his entire executive team. Sierra stiffened. Who told you that? Doesn't matter, Nora said, tossing the paper onto her desk. What matters is that you just pissed off the man who's invested millions in the media conglomerate that owns City Pulse. Damien Cross isn't just the CEO of CrossCorp. He's one of our major shareholders. And this morning he called and demanded you never set foot in his building again. Sierra felt the blood drain from her face. Shareholder? Damien Cross? Why didn't anyone tell me? Because you didn't ask, Nora replied dryly. And because I expected a journalist like you to do some research before walking into a minefield. But now we have a bigger issue. Cross agreed to lift the ban on one condition. Sierra narrowed her eyes. What condition? Nora slid a fax across the desk. He wants you to return to CrossCorp. He's agreed to grant you an interview if you serve as his temporary assistant for 7 days. His words, so she can understand who I really am. Sierra laughed, but the smile died when she saw Nora wasn't joking. You're kidding, right? An assistant? To that guy? I'm a journalist, not a secretary. And I'm an editor, not your mother, Nora snapped. You want to keep your job? Go back to CrossCorp, work 7 days, and bring me the interview the whole of New York will read. Or pack your desk. Your call. Sierra clenched her fists, fury crashing through her like a wave. She wanted to throw the fax in Nora's face, wanted to scream that Damian Cross didn't get to humiliate her. But she needed this job. She clawed her way up from intern to full-time reporter with blood, sweat, and caffeine. She wasn't going to let one arrogant CEO ruin that. Fine, she said through gritted teeth. 7 days, I'll do it. But I won't be fetching his coffee. Nora smiled for the first time during the entire meeting. Good. And Sierra? Don't call him a tyrant again. At least not to his face. The next afternoon, Sierra stood in front of the CrossCorp tower, like a gladiator stepping into the arena. She wore a crisp white blouse, black slacks, and had her hair tied up high, ready to face Damian Cross. The same receptionist from before handed her a temporary staff badge, with a look that was half sympathy, half intrigue. 42nd floor, the woman said. Mr. Cross is expecting you. The elevator ride felt like it lasted a century. When the doors opened, Sierra stepped into the familiar marble hallway, her heartbeat pounding. A young assistant with blonde hair and a hurried walk led her to a corner office. A sprawling space with windows overlooking the Manhattan skyline. Damian Cross sat behind his desk, dressed in a gray suit, fingers gliding across his laptop. He looked up as she entered, those icy eyes unreadable. Miss Lane, he said, voice deep like a judge handing out a sentence. Didn't think you'd come back. Sierra folded her arms and gave him a mocking smile. I'm not the quitting type, Mr. Cross. 7 days, right? I'll do the job. But don't expect me to fetch your coffee or press your suits. Damian stood, taller than she remembered, and stepped forward, stopping just a few feet from her. Good, he said, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. Because I don't need coffee. I need you to prove you're more than just a troublemaking journalist. For 7 days, you'll see how I run things. If you survive, you get your interview. If not, he shrugged, you know where the exit is. Sierra stared straight into his eyes, unblinking. Survive? You think I'm scared of you? I've interviewed drug lords, Mr. Cross. You're just a guy in an overpriced suit. He laughed, a short, sharp sound that startled her. We'll see, he said, then pointed to a small desk in the corner. Start by reading and summarizing this financial report. I need it in 2 hours. Welcome to CrossCorp, Miss Lane. Sierra sat down, biting her tongue to keep from snapping back. She watched him return to his desk, eyes already back on the screen, as if she were just another item on his to-do list. But she felt it. A spark. A challenge. Damian Cross might be the man everyone feared, but Sierra Lane wasn't everyone. And she was going to make damn sure he remembered her name. On Monday morning, Sierra Lane stepped onto the 42nd floor of CrossCorp, feeling like a gladiator walking into the Roman arena. The temporary staff badge around her neck clinked like a reminder. She was only a guest in Damian Cross's glass and steel fortress. She wore a crisp blue blouse, black slacks and flats, an outfit carefully chosen to look professional and to run if necessary. 7 days, she muttered, smoothing her hair. 7 days to survive the suit-wearing tyrant and bring home the interview of the century. Damian's office was massive, its windows overlooking the Manhattan skyline. The atmosphere as cold and sterile as a laboratory. He sat behind his desk, dressed in a dark gray suit, those ice blue eyes scanning her as she walked in. You're on time, he said, his deep voice devoid of emotion. I thought you'd quit after day 1. Sierra smiled, though she wanted to throw her badge in his face. Quit? You don't know me, Mr. Cross. Assign the task. I'm ready. Damian raised an eyebrow, a flicker of amusement flashing in his eyes. Good, he said, pushing a thick stack of papers across the desk. These are the financial reports from 4 of CrossCorp's European branches. Summarize them, flag any inconsistencies, and present your findings at the 3 p.m. meeting. You have 5 hours. Sierra stared at the pile, her heart sinking. She was a journalist, not an accountant. But Damien's gaze, challenging, almost mocking, made her clench her fists. Fine, she said, dragging the papers toward her. But if I find anything, you owe me an answer for the interview. He smirked, a short, sharp sound. Find something first, Miss Lane. Then we'll talk. The CrossCorp environment was like a battleground without bullets. Employees moved like machines, firing off emails filled with phrases like optimize deliverables and Q4 KPIs, like it was their native tongue. Sierra was given a small desk in the open office next to a soft-spoken assistant named Emily, who whispered, "No one survives more than 3 days doing Cross's tasks." Sierra just shrugged. "They're not me." The first assignment was a nightmare. Financial reports crammed with numbers, charts, and terms she barely remembered from Econ 101. But Sierra didn't fold. She opened her laptop, Googled every term, called a finance analyst friend, and took notes like a detective on a murder case. By noon, she spotted a suspicious expense in the Paris branch. $500,000 listed as strategic consulting with no attached invoice. She grinned, typed a sharp summary, and walked into the 3 p.m. meeting with the confidence of someone who just cracked the code. Damien sat at the head of the table, surrounded by tense executives. Sierra presented her findings in a clear voice, pointing to the shady entry. "I'm no expert," she said, glancing at Damien, "but $500,000 for consulting without a contract? Sounds like someone's hiding something." Silence fell. One exec coughed, pale-faced. Damien stared at her, unreadable. Not angry, but something closer to reluctant acknowledgement. "Good," he said. "I'll have it investigated. What else?" Sierra slid the report across the table. "It's all there. Read it. If you can find time between being a dictator." A few execs chuckled, but shut up immediately when Damien shot them a glance. He flipped through the summary and nodded. "Not bad, Ms. Lane. Tomorrow I need a presentation for our Japanese partners. In English, but culturally correct. 8 a.m. Sierra bit her lip to hold back a curse. She knew nothing about Japanese business culture. But Damien's expression said it all. He was waiting for her to fail. The next 7 days were relentless warfare. Damien hurled assignments at her like grenades, analyzing a 200-page legal contract, coordinating an international summit schedule, even replying to his emails in the official CrossCorp tone. Read cold and emotionless. Every task was a test meant to break her. But Sierra didn't break. She hit back with sharp wit in a journalist's eye for detail. When Damien asked her to summarize a contract, she didn't just summarize. She flagged a vague clause that posed a legal risk, forcing CrossCorp's legal team to revise the draft. When he made her reply to a partner's email, she added a subtle quip that got them a smiling response. And though Damien didn't admit it, he was clearly impressed. Once, she accidentally lingered outside his office and overheard a tense call with an investor. She remembered his exact phrasing and used the same negotiation tactic with a vendor, saving CrossCorp 10 grand. By day 5, Emily whispered to her during lunch, "You're the first one who hasn't cried after a cross assignment. Are you a witch or something?" Sierra laughed. "Number, I just hate losing." But she didn't win every round. On day 6, Damien handed her an impossible task. Create a market report on Asia in 24 hours. A project fit for someone with an MBA and a death wish. Sierra worked past midnight, eyes burning, only for Damien to glance at the report in the morning and say, "Not detailed enough." He tossed it onto the desk. "Do it again." Sierra shot to her feet, rage flaring. "Again? You think I'm a damn printer? I stayed up all night for this, and all you say is, not enough? Newsflash, Damien Cross. You are not the king of the universe." He looked at her, unblinking, but the corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "Then prove you don't need me to hold your hand, Miss Lane Redowit. Or walk." Sierra took a deep breath, turned on her heel, and stormed back to her desk, fueled by sheer stubbornness. She rewrote the report like a woman on a mission, like a reporter who once followed a corrupt senator across 3 states. She turned it in at the end of the day. This time Damien just nodded. "Acceptable," he said. But for the first time his eyes held something new, something that looked a lot like respect. Sierra Lane entered the 7th day of her 7-day war at Cross Corp with tired eyes but a blazing spirit. Over the past 6 days she had survived Damian Cross's impossible tasks, from financial analysis to vendor negotiations, and proved she wasn't just the troublemaking journalist he once called her. Today her final assignment was to accompany Damian to a charity gala at the Plaza Hotel, where Cross Corp was sponsoring a scholarship fund. "Don't embarrass me," Damian had said that morning, his ice blue eyes sweeping over her. But Sierra swore she saw something else in them, not mockery, expectation. Now she stood in front of the mirror in her tiny Brooklyn apartment, wearing an emerald evening gown, her brown hair falling in soft waves. "I'm not his assistant," she muttered, smoothing the fabric. "I'm a journalist, and tonight I'm going to dig up a few secrets on Damian Cross." But deep down, she knew her curiosity wasn't just about the article. It was about him, the cold CEO, with his rare smile and eyes that seemed to hold a story untold, was throwing her off more than she wanted to admit. The Plaza Hotel glittered with chandelier light, filled with the sounds of violins and the rich scent of fine wine. Sierra entered the ballroom clutching her clutch like a shield, feeling like a fish among sharks. Business moguls, politicians, and TV personalities moved with the confidence of people who belonged here. At the center stood Damian, black suit tailored to perfection, power radiating from him effortlessly. He shook hands with a sponsor, his polite smile not quite reaching his eyes. When he spotted Sierra, he nodded and gestured for her to come closer. "Miss Lane," he said, voice low and smooth. "You look not bad." Sierra raised an eyebrow and offered a teasing smile. "Thanks for the half-hearted compliment, Mr. Cross. You're not bad either, if you ignore the part where you look like you'd freeze the whole room." He chuckled, a short sound, but enough to startle her. "You have a task tonight," he said, handing her a list. "Take notes on the key donors, observe who's saying what, and report back to me before the event ends. Don't mess this up." Sierra glanced at the list and bit her lip to stop a retort. "Taking notes? I'm not your secretary." "No," he replied, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "You're a temporary assistant. 1 day left, Miss Lane. Don't ruin your streak." She turned on her heel, muttering something about dictators in suits, but began the task with the focus of a seasoned reporter. She moved through the crowd, listening in on conversations and jotting down notes on her phone. One elderly donor, a silver-haired woman in dazzling pearls, confided that Cross Corp had funded scholarships for hundreds of underprivileged students in the Bronx. But Damian insisted his name stay out of it. "He doesn't want anyone to know," the woman whispered, her eyes glowing. "But I know. That man has a heart. He just hides it well." Sierra froze mid-type, surprised. Damian Cross, the man she thought only cared about power and profits, secretly funding education? She looked across the room and saw him talking to a city councilman, but his eyes were distant, like his mind was somewhere else. She kept digging, casually chatting with a former Cross Corp employee who shared another story. 2 years ago, a factory worker was injured on the job. The partner company blamed the worker and threatened to sue. Damian shut down the lawsuit, paid the medical bills, and kept the man on staff. "He didn't say anything," the employee recalled. "Just told us to do the right thing. But everyone in that factory has been loyal to him ever since." What Sierra felt wasn't triumph. It wasn't even excitement over uncovering a good lead. It was confusion. Damian Cross wasn't just the cold-hearted CEO she'd imagined. He had layers, pieces she didn't yet understand. The gala stretched late into the night, the lights dimming as the orchestra played a soft piano piece. Tired from hours of observing and scribbling, Sierra slipped into a quiet corner with a glass of wine. She scanned the room looking for Damian and found him not at the center of attention, but alone in a corner near an old piano. He wasn't playing. He just sat, fingers brushing the keys like he was remembering a melody. His eyes were distant, and there was a sadness to him, something untouchable. Sierra stood, unsure what she was doing, and walked over. "Mr. Cross," she said, her voice softer than usual. "Didn't know you played piano. Or is that just a prop to make you look more mysterious?" Damian looked up, startled for a moment. Then his expression returned to its usual coolness. "Miss Lane," he said, "done with your observations? Or are you writing a piece on my taste in music?" She sat beside him without asking. "Not yet," she said with a faint smile. "But I'm curious. You fund scholarships, protect workers, and now sit here like a man who's lost everything. Who are you, Damien Cross? Really?" He stared at her for so long she began to wonder if she'd gone too far. Then he turned back to the piano, his fingers pressing a single low, sorrowful note. "You're a journalist," he said quietly. "You think you can dig into everything, but not every story is meant to be told." Sierra tilted her head, unflinching. "Maybe, but I think your story is worth hearing, if you'll let me." Damien didn't answer. He stood, adjusted his suit jacket, and walked away, leaving Sierra with the piano and a strange feeling in her chest. She watched him disappear into the crowd, her heart beating faster than usual. Damien Cross wasn't just her biggest professional challenge. He was a mystery, and for the first time, Sierra wasn't sure if she wanted to uncover him to write a story, or to truly understand the man beneath the frost. Sierra Lane sat in Damien Cross's corner office, the golden glow of Manhattan casting shifting patterns across her face through the massive windows. The 7-day stint as his temporary assistant had come to an end, and today Damien was keeping his word. An interview. But the atmosphere wasn't that of a typical interview. There was no recorder, no press presence. Just Sierra, her notebook open on her lap, and Damien sitting across from her in a pale gray suit. His ice blue eyes no longer seemed sharp. They were deep now, clouded, as if hiding something he didn't want to bring to the surface. Over the past week, Sierra had seen glimpses of a different Damien, an anonymous scholarship donor, a silent protector of factory workers, a man who sat alone by a piano with sorrow etched in his gaze. But one thing remained unclear: why he despised the media so deeply. She needed to know, not just for the article, but because she wanted to understand him. "Mr. Cross," she began gently, "I fulfilled your 7-day challenge. I think I've earned the truth. Why do you hate the media so much?" Damien froze, the tapping of his fingers on the desk ceasing. He looked at her, so long and so still that Sierra feared she'd crossed the line. Then he stood, walking slowly to the window, turning his back to her. "You don't give up, do you, Miss Lane?" His voice was low, bitter. "That's why you hired me," she replied with a faint smile. "And I'm asking not for a story. I just want to understand you." He turned back around, and for the first time she saw something raw in his eyes. Grief. Damien returned to his seat, fingers interlaced, taking a long breath. "Fine," he said, "but don't expect me to repeat this." Sierra nodded. Her pen hovered, but she didn't write. She simply listened. "When I was in college," Damien began, his voice steady but hollow, "my mother was a human rights lawyer. She fought for people no one else would protect. But one day Urban Voice ran a story on her, claimed she took bribes, exploited cases for personal gain. All lies, a smear campaign by a corporation she was suing. They had no evidence, but the headline was enough to destroy her." Sierra's heart clenched. She wanted to speak, but Damien's voice, now faintly trembling, held her in place. She was fired. Friends turned their backs. Charities she supported stopped returning her calls. She spiraled into depression. I stayed close, tried to help, but I was a 20-year-old kid, drowning in exams and startup dreams. I didn't see how far she'd fallen. He paused, voice thickening. A year later, she killed herself. I found her in the living room, with a note, apologizing, saying she was sorry for disappointing me. Silence. Damien stared at the floor. Sierra felt her throat tighten, tears threatening to rise, but she held them back. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I can't imagine what that was like." He gave a dry laugh, void of joy. "Don't be. I learned my lesson. The media doesn't care about the truth. They care about headlines, about what sells. After she died, I swore I'd never let them hurt anyone like that again." He looked up, his gaze harder now. "That's why I invested in Global Media Group, the parent company of City Pulse. I wanted to control it, reform it, hold it accountable. I didn't know Urban Voice had merged with City Pulse until years later. When I found out, I didn't pull my funding. I thought maybe I could change it from within. Sierra's breath caught. He didn't know. She set her pen down, pulse racing. You've done more than I ever expected, she said softly. Thank you for telling me. Damien studied her, eyes softening. You're a journalist, Miss Lane. I'm not sure I can trust you. But you're not like them. At least I hope not. The words struck her like a blade. She stood slowly and closed her notebook. I promise I won't use any of this without your permission. I need time to think. He gave a small nod. She left the office feeling like she'd walked out of a storm without an umbrella. Back in her Brooklyn apartment, Sierra opened her laptop and logged into the City Pulse archives. She typed in the headline she already half knew would exist. There it was. Human rights lawyer accused of bribery. Published by Urban Voice 15 years ago, before the merger with City Pulse. She had been 12 when the article came out, still years away from even dreaming of being a journalist. And yet, there was the modern City Pulse logo sitting above the archived article. It felt like an accusation. A brand she worked for had once destroyed the most important person in Damien's life. Sierra collapsed into her chair, hands trembling. She wanted to tell him the truth. She wanted to apologize, not as a representative of the press, but as herself. But revealing that she worked for the successor of Urban Voice could shatter the fragile trust between them. Trust she had spent 7 hard-earned days building. Being a journalist meant chasing the truth. But for the first time, Sierra wasn't sure if the truth was worth the price. She buried her face in her hands and whispered into the darkness, "What the hell am I supposed to do?" Sierra Lane stood in the small regional airport in Burlington, Vermont, staring through the frost-blurred windows as a snowstorm howled across the Adirondacks, like a beast unleashed. The flight status board blinked red. Cancelled. Inclement weather. She sighed, clutching her backpack tighter, feeling as if fate had decided to mock her. What was meant to be a simple interview with an environmental scientist for City Pulse, a distraction from the emotional whirlwind left by last week's conversation with Damien Cross, had turned into being stranded in a snow-locked airport. And standing just a few feet away, tapping on his phone with that signature cold detachment, was none other than Damien Cross himself. "You've got to be kidding me," Sierra muttered before stepping closer. "What are you doing here?" Damien looked up, his ice blue gaze flickering with surprise before settling back into practiced neutrality. "I could ask you the same, Miss Lane," he replied in that steady, unreadable tone. "I had a meeting with a partner on a clean energy initiative. And you? Digging up scandals in the snow now?" Sierra crossed her arms, masking her surprise with sarcasm. "Interviewing a scientist. Not everyone lives for drama like you, Mr. Cross." He raised an eyebrow, the corner of his mouth twitching into the smallest smirk. A look she'd grown to recognize over their bizarre week together. "Good, because I'm in no mood to spar with a reporter today." But fate had other plans. The gate agent soon announced that no flights would be departing for at least the next 24 hours. And as luck or mischief would have it, the nearby town had only one inn left with available rooms. After a brief, tense back and forth with the receptionist about who arrived first, Sierra and Damien somehow ended up sharing the last room. A tiny, outdated space with a single double bed, a worn armchair, and a scratched-up kitchenette. "Perfect," Sierra muttered, tossing her backpack onto the armchair. "Trapped in a 10-by-10 box with a suit-wearing Tyrant. Anyone want to trade lives?" Damien took off his coat, hung it neatly, and glanced at her with cool detachment. "You're welcome to sleep in the hallway. I'm not stopping you." Sierra shot him a glare but stayed quiet. The wind rattling the windows was cold enough to freeze her sarcasm. They settled into an unspoken truce, Sierra claiming the armchair with her notepad, Damien scrolling through emails from the bed. As night fell and the cold deepened, the kitchenette became their only hope for warmth. "I'll cook," Damien said abruptly, rising like he was calling a board meeting. Sierra blinked at him in disbelief as he rifled through the cabinets, producing a box of pasta, a can of tomato sauce, and a few dried herbs. "Don't look so shocked," he said without turning. "I've lived alone since I was 18. I can cook." For once her laugh wasn't mocking. "Didn't think you knew how to do anything that didn't involve contracts or terrifying interns?" He glanced at her, a spark of amusement in his eyes. "You'd be surprised, Miss Lane." They ate at the tiny table, lit by a single candle provided by the inn. The meal was simple, pasta and tomato sauce, but surprisingly good. Sierra had to admit, Damien Cross could cook. After dinner, they sat across from each other, sipping cheap red wine from mismatched mugs. Silence stretched, no longer uncomfortable. It began to melt into something gentler, something resembling a real conversation. Sierra found herself telling stories about her childhood in suburban New Jersey, stealing newspapers off neighbors' porches just to read the headlines, her dream to be a journalist so she could speak for people who had no voice. Damien listened quietly, intently, not interrupting once. Then she turned the question on him. "What about you?" she asked softly. "Before you became this?" She gestured to the confident, powerful exterior he always wore. Damien stared into the candle flame, its glow dancing in his eyes. "I was just a kid trying to prove I wasn't worthless," he said, voice low. "After my mom died, I worked like hell to build CrossCorp, to make sure no one could crush me the way they crushed her. But sometimes I wonder if it was worth it." Her chest tightened. The confession was raw, unguarded. She wanted to tell him everything, about Urban Voice, about how City Pulse inherited that legacy. But the truth lodged in her throat like a stone. Instead, she set down her mug and leaned in slightly. "It was worth it," she said gently. "You've helped people. Those scholarships, the factory worker, even me in some twisted way. You're not worthless, Damien." He looked at her, and for the first time, his eyes weren't cold. They were warm, vulnerable, aching. The space between them seemed to vanish. Then, without a word, his lips touched hers. A kiss. Light, slow, almost hesitant, like a question neither of them wanted to ask aloud. Sierra kissed him back, her hand finding his shoulder, feeling the warmth through his sweater. In that moment, there was no City Pulse, no Urban Voice, no ghosts of past betrayals. There were only two people lost in a snowstorm, finding something they hadn't expected. But when the candle burned out, Damien pulled away. His eyes returned to distance. "We shouldn't have," he murmured, standing and turning his back. "You're a journalist. I can't." Sierra felt something twist in her chest, but she forced a nod. "Fine," she said, her voice clipped. "Let's pretend it didn't happen." The next morning the storm had passed, and Damien was back to his usual, unreadable self. They left the inn in silence, only the sound of snow crunching beneath their boots. As she watched him climb into a black SUV, Sierra's heart felt heavier than she expected. That kiss had crossed a line they were never supposed to blur. But even if Damien pretended it meant nothing, she knew the truth. Something had shifted, and she wasn't sure they could ever go back to what they were before. Are you still following the story? Please leave your thoughts on the story in the comments below. All your comments are the motivation for us to create better stories. Don't forget to subscribe to Soul Stories. Thank you very much. Sierra Lane sat alone in her small office at City Pulse, the glow from her laptop screen casting sharp light across her tired, determined face. The clock on the wall read 2 a.m., but she couldn't stop. Not yet. The article she'd written, Damien Cross, More Than a Powerhouse, had haunted her ever since that quiet kiss in the Vermont inn. Ever since Damien had told her about his mother, Margaret Cross, a human rights lawyer whose life had been destroyed by a false media smear from Urban Voice. Now every word she typed was her way of telling the world who Damien truly was. Not just the cold, untouchable CEO of CrossCorp, but a man who had clawed his way through heartbreak to build something meaningful. She wrote about the anonymous scholarships he funded, the injured worker he protected, the lonely figure he became beside the piano, how he hid a wounded noble heart behind a fortress of power. She didn't write the piece to sensationalize. It wasn't a takedown or an exposé. It was a portrait. And though she omitted Urban Voice and City Pulse, knowing how deeply those names hurt him, she still felt her chest tighten every time she reread it. Because even the purest story could expose pain, and Damien had trusted her. She saved the draft and emailed it privately to editor-in-chief Nora Baxter with a clear note. Draft only. Do not publish until I speak to Damien. Then exhausted, she laid her head on the desk and whispered into the dark, Please let this be the right thing. The next morning, City Pulse buzzed with an unusual tension. People looked at Sierra with strange expressions, some curious, others uncomfortable. She entered the newsroom to find Nora waiting, holding a stack of papers with a grim expression. Lane, Nora said sharply, we need to talk. Now! Sierra took the papers and froze. Damien Cross, more than a powerhouse. It was her draft, unpolished, unfinished, with red highlights marking the most personal passages, especially the one about his mother. Her breath caught. Who printed this? She demanded, voice shaking. I said do not publish. It wasn't ready. Nora's face didn't soften. Doesn't matter who printed it. What matters is Damien Cross has it. He called this morning, furious, said you pretended to care just to get his story. He wants to see you. Now. Sierra's knees went weak. Somehow, maybe someone had accessed Nora's email. Maybe it was deliberate sabotage. Her draft had reached Damien. And now the man she had come to admire, maybe even love, thought she'd betrayed him. She raced to CrossCorp, heart hammering, sprinting up to the 42nd floor. Damien's office was cold, dim with the gray light pouring in from the windows. He stood behind his desk, the printed article clenched in one hand, eyes like frozen steel. Miss Lane, he said, voice low and cutting. I trusted you. I told you about my mother, about what the media did to her, and your response is this? You dig it up so the world can pick it apart all over again? You're no different than Urban Voice. Her chest tightened, tears threatening, but she held them back. Damien, no. You're wrong. I wrote this to honor you, to show the world the man who rose from pain and still chose compassion. I never meant to hurt you. I wasn't going to publish it without your permission. Damien slammed the article onto his desk, the pages fanning out like a wound split open. Honor me. You work for City Pulse, the same paper that inherited Urban Voice's legacy. You think I believe you didn't know? That those 7 days, that kiss, were just your way of earning my trust? Her voice broke. I didn't know at first, but I swear once I did, I stopped. I wrote this because I cared, Damien. What happened between us wasn't fake. None of it was. But his eyes, filled with betrayal, told her it didn't matter. I can't believe a word you say, he said hoarsely. Get out. Don't come back. Sierra wanted to fight, to scream, to make him see. But the devastation in his voice told her the damage was done. So she left, every step away from that office tearing her apart. Back at City Pulse, she walked straight to her desk, pulled out a flash drive, and wrote her resignation letter. She placed both on Nora's desk. On a small note taped to the USB, she scribbled, I wrote this so the world could see who he really is, not to break him. I hope one day he understands. Then she walked out of the newsroom and into the cold chaos of New York, where the October wind and sirens couldn't drown out the pain inside her chest. She had chosen Damien, chosen his heart over the career she had dreamed of since she was a girl stealing newspapers just to read the headlines. But as she looked up at the towers of glass and steel surrounding her, she didn't know if she had just lost everything, or finally done the one thing that truly mattered. Damien Cross sat in his corner office on the 42nd floor of CrossCorp, the gray October light of New York filtering through the window, casting a somber hue across his face, as if even the light wished to hide the cracks he had spent years concealing. For the first time in years, he felt out of control, not of CrossCorp, not of million-dollar deals, and certainly not of his own heart. On the desk lay a small note from City Pulse, Sierra Lane's final message. I wrote to show the world who you truly are, not to hurt you. I hope one day you'll understand. His fingers trembled as he clutched the note, as if it were the last thread tying him to something he wasn't brave enough to name. He had read those words dozens of times, each one dragging him back to that candlelit room in Vermont, where the shadows danced in her brown eyes, where their hesitant kiss made him feel, for the first time, like more than a ghost surviving pain. But then came the article draft, Damien Cross, more than a powerhouse, with lines about his mother, about the scars left by Urban Voice and the media. He'd exploded, convinced she'd betrayed him, exploited his vulnerability. He had sent her away, voice cold as ice. But now, he knew he'd been wrong. Nora Baxter, editor-in-chief of City Pulse, had called him that morning. Her voice had been sharp but laced with something rare. Regret. "Sierra never intended to publish that piece without your permission," Nora had said. "She resigned right after you told her to leave. She chose you, Cross, over the dreams she's chased her whole life." The words hit him like a wave, drowning out every defense he had left. Sierra wasn't Urban Voice. She wasn't the kind of journalist who destroyed people for clicks. She had seen him, truly seen him, with all his scars, and he had pushed her away because he was afraid of trusting, afraid of losing again. Damien stood, pacing his office as the walls closed in. For 15 years he had lived with the pain of his mother's death, bearing it under work, power, and unspoken grief. He had believed hiding was survival, masking the hole in his chest with contracts and control. But Sierra Lane, with her sharp tongue, fearless heart, and eyes like a world he secretly longed for, had shaken that foundation. And now her silence since that day, no emails, no calls, hurt more than any accusation ever could. It was emptiness, like the quiet living room where he had found his mother's body and her final apology. It was the ache of living years without daring to feel. He needed space, a place to confront the truth. He canceled all meetings and drove to his childhood home in rural Connecticut, the lakeside cottage where he and his mother had once shared quiet, golden afternoons. The house was old now, its roof moss-covered, windows fogged with memory. Inside, the scent of damp wood and aging books clung to him. He sat in the living room, the same spot where he'd found her letter, and let the silence wrap around him. And then, in that stillness, the truth bled through. He couldn't keep burying the pain. He tried to forget her, to fill the void with success and anonymous generosity. But the grief had never left. Sierra, her words, her sacrifice, had shown him a different way. To face it, to face his mother and the truth, she had done nothing wrong. She had loved him. To face himself, a man full of scars but still yearning for trust, for love. That trust, fragile like the Vermont candlelight, was Sierra's gift. She hadn't just seen the CEO. She saw the broken son, the guarded man, and chose to stay even after he pushed her away. From his mother's old desk, he took out a piece of aged stationery and a fountain pen, untouched for 15 years. He had never written a letter by hand. His world was emails and contracts. But for Sierra, he needed something real. Something she could hold, the way she had once held his heart without even knowing. Slowly he wrote, "Sierra, I was wrong. I thought you were like them. The ones who took my mother, who took everything. But you're not. You saw me, not Cross Corp, not the pain, me. A man scarred, afraid, and unwilling to trust. Your article? I read it again, and I saw your heart in every word. A heart trying to tell the world that I am more than grief. I've hidden for too long, thinking forgetting was the only way. But you gave me something else. Belief. That I can face it. Face her. Face myself. Your silence. It hurts more than anything. But I hope it's not the end. If you still want to tell my story, I'll tell it with you. And maybe, if you'll let me, we can write a new story. Ours. Damien." He folded the letter, slipped it into an envelope, and mailed it to her Brooklyn apartment, the address he'd found in her old City Pulse file. Standing by the lake, moonlight shimmering on the water, he felt lighter, as if a weight he'd carried for 15 years had been set down. But the fear remained, that she wouldn't answer, that this hope was just a dream. He closed his eyes and saw her smile, her eyes filled with light. And for the first time in years, Damien let himself hope. Hope that love, if faced with courage, could lead him through the dark. In Brooklyn, Sierra Lane sat in her small apartment, city lights flickering through the window like stars fallen to earth. Old newspapers were stacked beside her coffee cup, cold and forgotten. She hadn't opened her laptop since quitting, hadn't written a word. It felt like the pen inside her had dried up with her dream. But deep down, she knew the truth. She was afraid. afraid that if she wrote, she'd write about him, about Damien, his eyes like storm skies, that kiss in Vermont that made her heart beat like it never had, the way he made her believe she could be more than a reporter. She could be someone he needed. Her pain wasn't just losing her career. It was the silence. His silence. She had chosen him, given up her dream to protect his trust. But his final accusing stare at CrossCorp still haunted her. Had he ever believed her? When the doorbell rang, she startled. A mail courier handed her an envelope. The handwriting was bold but unfamiliar. She opened it, unfolded the letter. And the moment she read his name at the bottom, the tears came. Not from sorrow, but from a spark reigniting inside her. Each word was a heartbeat, each sentence a bridge back to something she hadn't dared name. He didn't just apologize. He opened up, acknowledged his pain, and invited her in. He wanted her to write with him, to face the past together, and maybe to build something new. She clutched the letter to her chest, smiling through tears, and whispered, "Okay, Damien, let's write it. And maybe, let's love too." She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but the letter in her hands was a promise that pain could be faced, trust could be rebuilt, and love, even when born from all the wrong places, could still lead them to something bright. Sierra Lane stood backstage at the Waldorf Astoria ballroom, her heart pounding like it might burst from her chest. Stage lights pierced through the velvet curtains, glinting off her silver evening gown, but she didn't feel like she belonged in this dazzling world. Outside, the crowd, business moguls, philanthropists, journalists, awaited the launch of the Margaret Cross Foundation, an initiative founded by Damien Cross to support human rights attorneys and victims of media malpractice. She clutched the microphone tightly, breathing deep, her gaze drifting to her trembling hand, where she could almost still feel the warmth of Damien's fingers from all the quiet moments they'd shared in secret since his letter, 2 weeks ago. That letter, with its bold but heartfelt handwriting, had pulled her out of the darkness. "I was wrong. You gave me faith, that I could face it, face her, face myself. This time, let's write it together." After that, they met at a quiet cafe in Greenwich Village, where Damien, without his usual suit, sat across from her in a soft gray sweater, his icy eyes finally warm, as if he'd let a part of his wall come down. They apologized, he for accusing her, she for not telling him about the connection between City Pulse and Urban Voice. Then they made a decision to rewrite the story, not just Damien's but his mother's. Margaret Cross, the woman destroyed by lies because she dared to fight for justice. Their love, though still unnamed, had begun to bloom quietly. In stolen evenings over coffee, as Sierra shared tales of sneaking newspapers as a child, and Damien told stories of his mother playing piano. In long walks along the Hudson, where he held her hand like he was afraid she'd vanish. Every time their eyes met, Sierra felt a slow, steady fire, like the candlelight in that Vermont room. They weren't rushing. She helped him rebuild his faith in the press. He learned to confront his pain, little by little. Stronger than any love confession, these were acts of trust. The new article, Margaret Cross, The Legacy of Justice, was born from that trust. Sierra wrote it based on Damien's memories, stories of his mother's laughter after winning a case for a homeless man, of her teaching him Clair de Lune on the piano. But it didn't stop at memories. With Damien's help, Sierra dug into old documents, Margaret's letters to colleagues, case notes, and an email from a former client that proved the 2010 Urban Voice article was a paid smear campaign, funded by a real estate company she was suing. The article didn't just clear Margaret's name, it painted her as a symbol of integrity, a legacy Damien was continuing through CrossCorp and the foundation. Sierra stepped onto the stage. The spotlight made her blink, but she found Damien in the front row, sharp in a black suit, his blue eyes locked on hers, not with suspicion, but with unwavering belief. She raised the mic. Her voice shook slightly, but it was clear. "I'm Sierra Lane," she began, "and a few months ago I thought Damien Cross was a suit-wearing tyrant who only knew how to sign contracts and scare interns." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Damien raised a brow, lips curling into a smile only for her. Sierra smiled back, steadied herself. "But I was wrong. I rewrote this story, Not just about Damien, but about resilience. About a man who lost his mother to a media lie, but chose to turn that pain into hope. And about his mother, Margaret Cross, a human rights lawyer defamed, whose legacy will live on through this foundation and through the article we wrote together. She paused, her eyes meeting Damien's again. In that moment, the whole room faded. We wrote Margaret Cross, The Legacy of Justice, together, she continued, voice catching. Through Damien's memories and the evidence we found, we showed the world that Margaret wasn't someone who took bribes. She was a woman who fought for the voiceless. Damien brought that legacy to life, and I'm honored to have been part of that story. Applause erupted, but Sierra saw only Damien. He stood, clapping, his eyes shimmering, not for the article, but for her, the woman who had given him the courage to confront his past and share what he once wanted to bury. As she stepped off stage, she handed him the mic. Their fingers brushed, warm and familiar, like the kiss in Vermont, now stronger, like an unspoken vow. Damien took the stage, thanked the audience, but his voice trembled when he mentioned his mother. Margaret Cross taught me that justice is worth fighting for, he said, eyes searching for Sierra. And Sierra Lane taught me that sometimes you have to face the pain to find hope. Thank you, Sierra, for not giving up on me. The article, published under City Pulse's Hope and Humanity section, where Sierra returned as a freelance contributor after Nora's personal invitation, became a phenomenon. Readers called it the most moving article of the year. Social media was flooded with praise, a tribute to Margaret Cross, and a song of resilience sung by her son. After the event, Sierra stood on the hotel balcony, watching the glowing Manhattan skyline. Damien joined her, 2 glasses of wine in hand. He handed her one. You did well, Miss Lane, he said in a teasing baritone, though I still haven't forgiven you for calling me a suit-wearing tyrant. Sierra laughed, sipping her wine, but her eyes softened. I was scared, Damien, she admitted quietly. Scared I'd hurt you, like Urban Voice did. But you gave me trust, that we could tell this story, together. He set down his glass, stepped closer, and cupped her cheek gently, fingers trembling, as if afraid she'd disappear. And you gave me trust, he murmured, voice husky, eyes deep as an ocean, that I didn't have to hide the pain, that I could face it, face her, face you. I love you, Sierra. Not because you wrote the article, but because you're the only person who's ever made me want to live honestly. Her heart pounded, tears spilling even as she smiled, her signature spark still in her gaze. I love you too, Damien Cross, she whispered, even if you did almost drive me crazy with financial reports. But I guess that was the price of finding you. He laughed, pulled her into his arms, and they kissed under the New York lights. A kiss deep, certain, no longer hesitant, as if both had finally arrived at the end of a long, winding road. They stood there shoulder to shoulder, knowing their love, built on wrong doors, old wounds, and shared words, was a story worth keeping. Not just for them, but for anyone who believes in redemption and in beginning again.